Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're exploring early Islamic societal protocols through a really unique, almost futuristic lens. We're going to look at what you could call the Medina operating system. Think of it as a sort of biopunk Medina aesthetic, if you will. We want to see exactly how these early rules governed society, how they integrated diverse groups of people, and ultimately how the whole system is designed to culminate in this perfectly balanced future. So let's jump right in. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The Medina Integration Protocol. 2. Zakat, faith and redistribution. 3. Jizya, the civil tax. And finally, 4. The era of Isa. Section 1. The Medina Integration Protocol. Okay, so to understand any operating system, you first have to understand its baseline, right? Like, what is the default state of the hardware it's running on? In this paradigm, that baseline is defined by an active state of purity and ontological harmony. It's a concept known as fitra. And this is absolutely crucial because it's a stark contrast to theological frameworks that are built around the idea of original sin. In this system, there isn't some congenital spiritual deficit that requires a savior. Instead, with fitra, humanity inherits purity and harmony right out of the gate. So the entire societal operating system is built to maintain and align with that pure baseline, rather than trying to redeem a flawed one. Section 2. Zakat, faith and redistribution. Let's see how that baseline translates into our first major civic protocol, which is Zakat. You can basically think of this as the internal operating system designed specifically for the Muslim population within the state. Now, Zakat is not merely a tax, and it's definitely not just optional charity. It is a mandatory act of worship for Muslims that also serves a highly practical socioeconomic function. It actively purifies wealth. How? By ensuring a constant, calculated redistribution of resources from the rich to the poor. It's quite literally designed to stop wealth from pooling up and stagnating among the elite, which keeps the entire societal network incredibly healthy. And this protocol is hyper-specific about where that wealth actually goes. Look at these 8 exact categories. We can think of them as glowing data nodes where funds are systematically routed to keep society balanced. You've got the poor and the needy, obviously, but the system also allocates funds to free those in bondage, to relieve people who are drowning in debt, to pay the administrators who are actually running the system, and even to help out stranded travelers known as the wayfarer. The system actively targets the exact vulnerabilities in the social fabric. What's really fascinating here is that this wasn't just some rigid, unthinking code. It was incredibly dynamic. History gives us this amazing example involving Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second caliph. He actually paused zakat payments to one specific node, the reconciled hearts. Originally, those were funds used to win over potential converts or new allies. But Umar diagnosed that the system of Islam had grown so robust and strong that they just didn't need to do that anymore. The underlying cause was gone, so the protocol actively adapted to the new reality on the ground. Section 3. Jizya, the civil tax.
All right, so that covers the internal protocol. But how did this system integrate the people living in the society who were operating on completely different religious beliefs? Well, for non-Muslim citizens, the operating system deployed jizya. This was a purely civil tax, and it is vital to note that this required absolutely zero compulsion in religion, none. It was simply a mechanism to demonstrate subjection to the civil and legal order of the state. It ensured that non-Muslims were fully integrated into the civic framework without ever being forced to adopt the spiritual framework.
And here is where the systemic inequity really shines. When you think about modern debates we have today about tax fairness, this ancient approach is actually pretty striking. Just like zakat is a strict obligation only for Muslims who possess a certain threshold of wealth, jizya was strictly levied only on non-Muslim men who actually had the financial means to pay it. It was a perfectly balanced requirement designed to sustain the state, absolutely not to crush the vulnerable. It essentially functioned as a highly pragmatic, direct social contract. In exchange for paying this civil tax, non-Muslims were guaranteed absolute protection by the state's military and security apparatus. They were guaranteed total freedom to practice their own faith undisturbed. And they were promised fair and equitable treatment as citizens. It really makes you wonder, how often do historical models of integration actually formalize protection and religious freedom as a direct transaction of citizenship? Putting these protocols side by side makes the whole thing click. When we directly compare them as tools for social integration, the distinction is super elegant. Zakat targets Muslims. It acts as both worship and a tax, guaranteeing spiritual attunement while redistributing wealth. On the flip side, jizya targets non-Muslims. It's strictly a civil state tax, guaranteeing state protection and complete religious freedom. Together, they form one incredibly robust, comprehensive civic operating system. By processing these two distinct protocols at the exact same time, this perfectly balanced system maintained harmony and security. Energy and resources just flowed seamlessly throughout the entire equitable network, all centered around the sanctuary. But all of this brings us to a really profound question. What is the end game of this biopunk Medina? If the whole system is built to constantly redistribute wealth and maintain civic harmony, what actually happens when the system achieves perfect equilibrium? Basically, what happens when it wins? Section 4. The Era of Ajiza. To understand this ultimate endgame, we have to look at Isa, Jesus. In the sources, he is described as the literal word of Allah. He's presented almost like a master code brought into existence by a direct divine command, be. It's very much like how Adam was coded directly into existence from dust. The divine command itself is the code. Now remember our earlier discussion about fitra versus original sin? In this specific paradigm, Isa does not descend to fix some congenital human flaw, because there is no original sin to redeem in this framework. He arrives as the ultimate, perfect embodiment of that original sacred love. He is literally the active, breathing manifestation of pristine fitra in human form. And his era represents the ultimate barzakh. Now, barzakh is a concept explored deeply by the scholar Ibn Taymiyyah. It describes this active interface, a perfect equilibrium between two poles. So it's not just a mathematical middle ground, it is an entirely new, elevated state arising from the interaction of two poles, like spirit and matter, where they perfectly elevate one another without ever dissolving into each other. And this culminates in a mind-blowing futuristic vision. During the era of Isa, this state of barzakh reaches such a highly optimized frequency that perfect equilibrium is achieved. Spiritual and material wealth simply overflow. The system becomes so incredibly abundant and so perfectly balanced that material wealth goes way beyond any human need. Because of this, the old civic protocols, like the wealth redistribution of zakat or the civil integration tax of jizya, they actually become completely obsolete. Literally, there is no one left in need to even take the funds. Which leaves us with a truly fascinating paradigm to chew on. If we ever reach an era where abundance is so absolute, where the socioeconomic protocols of integration are permanently retired because perfect balance has been achieved, we have to ask ourselves, what new frontiers of the spirit would humanity be called to explore next? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.